Don't tread on me. I have the N-word pass, Negro. I am super bisexual, like Kylie Jenner.
You may wonder what these people are. That is the people that I would call SJWs, but without social justice. These people are the libertarians. They are fascinating people. They are questionable in how much they worship the market and how much they see the world in such a simplistic way. There's this binary view they have. There's the market, the free market that they idealize, and then there is the government. This government, as if government is this monolithic group. And they go into this battle with this morality they construct. Everything that is negative in the world, they blame on one thing, and that one thing is government. And they think all the world's solutions will be the market. The market can provide all things for citizens. The market will increase the health, the well-being, and the mental possibilities of the world in general. I found this concept, this idea of the world as being hostile to reality. They don't realize the complexity of human behavior. They want to determine all things for this narrow economic concept. And today I would like to debunk, or let's say critique, these people. They're fascinating with their mindless pursuit of this idealized society. Of course, I never liked these people, but I find their illusions or delusions fascinating. When we are talking about SJWs, we are talking about the perception that right-wingers have of leftists. According to the right-wingers, leftists are these people that fight for stupidity. That is, this stupidity is what we call social liberalism. That the complete embrace of non-traditional relationships. Social liberalism is also the rejection of simplistic human behaviors. That is the rejection of how a society must be emotional, how a society must be healthy, how a society must believe in all. To the social liberal, all these things are whatever you want them to be. If you want to be healthy in whatever way you want, or unhealthy in whatever way you want, then you should be. If you want to go into one of those relationships that are questionable to almost all people with sense, then go ahead. If you want to be one of those people that go around and hurting others when they want to, then go ahead. If you want to mutilate yourself in whatever way you can, then that's okay to the social liberal. The libertarian accepts all these things. They want to bring these things to the most extreme form, the most hedonistic way possible. And the libertarian, like the perceived SJW, is dogmatic about these beliefs. They are truly dedicated to these beliefs. They're faithful to everything involving these beliefs. They worship everything involving these beliefs. They want to preserve the things they gain. And these people will totally preserve their values at whatever cost possible. Usually, when they try to do this, they complain, they whine, well, you get the idea. They just hate others for disagreeing with them. And they act in the most immature way possible. The main difference between the right-wingers' perception of the leftists and the libertarians of the right is that the libertarians of the right do not fight for social justice. They do not believe in any form or any attempt at equality. They want to be greedy. They want to take as much as possible for themselves alone. And they do not care about anyone else. Though they care about themselves, their safe space. Well, they will probably be fine with multiracial, transgender, weird stuff, stuff that modern and stupid conservatives believe in. I thought this would be the perfect time to talk about such people. To me, their popularity has declined, or how much people watch their videos. This community of pseudo-intellectuals has declined. The biggest channel of this community, or biggest channels of this community, was Mr. Dapperton. He somehow just deleted his channel. All his videos, all these important things are gone, at least for now. So I won't be reviewing him. Though I can tell that Mr. Dapperton has tricked his viewers.
Quickie over there! Laughably and horrifically, modern revisionists claim that segregation in the United States was the result of the free market and the good and benevolent government had to ride in on a white horse and save everyone. Ridiculous! Jim Crow laws were just that. Laws! Almost immediately after the Civil War, businesses started hiring and serving blacks, much to the chagrin of the political elite. So they passed laws mandating segregation. They had to pass laws because the market, by and large, wasn't doing it. Even without the laws, they still maintained control over the police, and they used them to harass and remove blacks anywhere they felt like it, even if it wasn't illegal for them to be there. Did you know that the Underground Railroad continued into the 20th century? Free people helping blacks escape to states without segregation laws because it was illegal for them to leave, even though they weren't leaving the country. They also used the monopolistic control of public utilities to deny services to blacks. Despite the rhetoric that we need government to make sure these services are supplied equally to all the people, in large part, the monopolies were made so they could shut out undesirable elements. And these were Democrats. Remember that the progressive movement came out of the eugenics movement, and things like public utilities, zoning, minimum wage, labor laws, housing projects, and all sorts of things that progressives still favor today were designed specifically to marginalize blacks and other groups they viewed as inferior. Blaming the free market for segregation is not only ridiculous, it's dangerous to the future of minorities in this country.
The name of this YouTuber is Shane Killigan. According to Shane Killigan, segregation was bad because there was no free market. Shane Killigan has simply made a revisionist version of history, a negative version of revisionism. Once again, These libertarians have a simplistic view of government. The state is only a tool for individuals or groups to use. The state is a neutral force in human existence. It is only a tool that we construct. To say that all government is bad is a simplistic viewpoint. It is like saying that all tools are bad. It is a neutral force. The state is what we want it to be. That is to say, if racial supremacists have control over government, they will discriminate. However, if those that are counter to this ideology have control over the government, then they will enact policies that are the opposite of that. I will say that one of the funny things about this video that Killigan made was that he assumed that the Democrats of then were the same Democrats of today. This is false when you simply look at their rhetoric, not only their rhetoric, but how they appeal to others, how many demographics are in their party. The Democrats have become very racially diverse and very socially liberal. Dislike many Republicans, libertarians like to point to the past to give reasons why current groups are bad. Such people don't really realize that things can change with time. The foundation of nations, or the way nations are formed, can be different to how it reforms. A nation from a long time ago will be different in maybe it is only a few decades. Our society has changed, many things have changed. Shane Killigan has not really looked at the material conditions of our society or anything of the present. He does not really see the difference or see how the difference between past and present affects current groups. There's a greater complexity of things. Another problem that exists in Killigan's narrative, Killigan assumes that the people that help the blacks are libertarians. However, many people that research the civil rights movement know that this isn't true. Many of the participants in the movement were left-wing. Many of them are black, but there were many whites that were of those beliefs.
Before I explain why I hate capitalism, let me first explain to y'all what it is.
Anyone taking any bets on how horrible this will be?
Capitalism is an economic system where the means of production are owned and administered privately. Goods are exchanged through a so-called free market for profit. Those that don't have any goods to sell, they will sell their ability to work to someone that owns production means in return for a wage.
Okay, several problems here. Those that do have the goods to sell, and those that do have the means of production, how do you think they got them? Do you think it just rained down on them like manna from heaven? Or did they sacrifice, using money they could have used to consume things for themselves, or go in debt to invest just to get them? And the rest of them, why is their only option to work for someone in return for a wage? In a capitalist system, there's nothing at all whatsoever that's stopping them from starting their own business. That only happens when government gets involved. The real definition of capitalism is an economy based on voluntary transactions. Look at how, like all socialists, he tries to bake his assumptions into the definition, because he can't support these assumptions any other way.
I do not think that the capitalists magically gain power. Rather, the capitalist starts off like any other person usually. They will rise up to the hierarchy, but once they do reach up to the hierarchy, they will actually consolidate power, and from that, they prevent others from reaching to the top as well. Another thing about the capitalists is that a majority of them, as well as their children, will be rich. Their children will most likely be spoiled brats, so will waste most of the money. Therefore, what they have mostly done is a waste of our society. Therefore, in many cases, this creates an oligarchy. In many cases, an oligarchy can form when the rich of a society pass down their wealth to their children.
This is where the problems arise. In order to profit, the capitalist has to pay the worker less value than the worker actually produced. The worker is not allowed to keep the value he or she produced.
The way it really works is that the business owner values the labor more than he values the wage he pays for it, and also that the worker values the wage he gets more than he values the time and effort he puts into his job. Notice how the commies always want to ignore that second part. The fact is, this is a voluntary transaction, and like all voluntary transactions, both sides come out ahead. It's win-win. If their labor really is worth more, then why don't they create their own business and get the full value out of it? It doesn't work, and to see why, with numbers, see my video refuting surplus labor once and for all. Oh, and by the way, despite the misleading graph you showed, inequality goes down the more capitalist a country is.
This second part that Shane Killigan talks about doesn't actually really prove his point. Shane Killigan admits that the capitalist cares more about production than the wage that the worker gets. He also admits that the worker cares more about the wage than the work they pay. This does not debunk the claim of the person he's critiquing. If the businessman cares about profit, then he must maximize production as much as possible. In many places across the world with less regulations for worker rights, it'll be essential to limit those rights as much as possible because he can increase his profit by making the worker stay at the workplace as much as possible. If the worker cares only for the wage, then he or she will do whatever is needed to get that wage, even if they lose something from it. Mr. Killigan then goes on to say that voluntary transactions are good. It is true that they can be good in many cases, though voluntary does not equal good. For example, a woman working in a factory might go there voluntarily, but that doesn't mean that she will gain anything good from it. She may get injuries, she may not get that much of a wage, she may die there. Mr. Killigan likes to say that the worker can just make their own business. This is true, but the worker wouldn't have much attention. The worker also wouldn't have enough property, they wouldn't have enough employees, they wouldn't be able to produce as much products as much as places like Walmart. And Walmart is familiar to the masses, especially with all the advertisement. In a free market society, Shane wouldn't really have a problem with how things are run. He wouldn't really have a problem with large corporations overcoming smaller ones.
The value the capitalist extracts for profit here is straight out theft.
Yeah, people doing work at a wage they voluntarily agreed to. Such theft.
People believing in the system will likely argue here that wage labor is voluntarily, thus it's not theft.
Yeah, because theft requires force, you dumbass!
But remember, and always remember, if a worker does not work, the worker will, guaranteed, die of hunger.
And here we are, the long-refuted work or starve canard. Tell me something, moron! Is it the capitalists starving them, or is that just the state of nature? Do you think that it wasn't work or starve in hunter-gatherer times, or in the Roman Empire? Do you think everyone sat around well fed after a long day's laying around in the fields, and then capitalism came along and all of a sudden people started starving? And why do we see far more starvation in socialist economies? How come the big problem with the poor in capitalist countries isn't starvation, but obesity? The fact is, the poor not only do not starve in America, they also have a lot of extras that would have been considered luxury items if not completely incomprehensible to even the richest before capitalism, including temperature controls, fresh food, vaccines, internet access, all sorts of things. And yes, that includes better nutrition and fewer skipped meals. It even includes a greater amount of living space per person. What capitalism did was give us the opportunity to work for something besides staving off starvation.
I would say that Killigan's argument doesn't really count for me because I am not an anarcho-communist that believes in such simplistic morality. Once again, Killigan thinks that something being voluntary makes it good. It's simply not true because the world is more complex than that. Shane likes to complain about socialism having starvation, though he ignores that the majority of the world's nations are third world nations, and most of these nations are capitalist countries. The problems of many of these nations may not be capitalism, but capitalism does little to actually help these nations. One example of this is the country of Chad, and another example of this is the country of Colombia. And I'm sure you'll like Colombia because it has lots of drugs. Links will be in the description below. I like how Killigan likes to depict America's capitalism as a type of utopia. This is obviously not true when you look at the places like Chicago, Atlanta, or regions like Appalachia. You see lots of homelessness. Like, I checked his sources, the Heritage Foundation's articles on this. The funny thing about Killigan is that he likes to use such papers like this foundation as proof of the material conditions of the world. This is obviously not true. All you have to do is really look at the actual conditions with your own eyes. And another thing about this is that Killigan only depends on one source, this one foundation, and that's all. One of the stupid things that Killigan said was that capitalism is the thing that made all the achievements of the world. That is such a reductionist way to see history in such simplistic economic terms. The world is more complex than that.
Because of this, a class war is generated. A class war between the working class and the capitalist class.
So tell me, why do the socialists all seem to be spoiled rotten brats like you, and actual poor and working people tend to be more conservative or libertarian? Answer honestly, have you gone hungry even a day in your life?
The capitalist and the worker will at all times have conflicting interests.
No, they don't. They have a fruitful win-win relationship.
The capitalist wants to pay the workers as little as possible in order to profit the more.
And the workers want to do as little work as possible for as much pay as possible so they can profit. You just never want to put it in those terms. Gee, I wonder why. What you're talking about is the demand curve, and the workers comprise the supply curve. The equilibrium is the point where they cross. If firms pay workers too little, they'll have a shortage. They won't be able to hire as many people as they want. All of this is basic economics. It's amazing how little you morons understand it.
This segment is filled with so much horrendous assumptions. One of your greatest assumptions about leftists is that you assume all of them are upper middle class kids. This isn't true simply because you have so much groups that don't fit in that category. For example, you have Maoist rebels in India. You have so many rebels in Latin America that don't count as that. Another thing I want to say is that I have worked it in my life. I also used to live in an undeveloped nation, so I understand what poverty is like. In fact, another thing about myself is that I am not upper class. Though I'm not really exactly proletariat, so lower middle class would be more accurate for myself. I find it funny that Killigan likes to think that the capitalist and the lower class are in a harmonious relationship. However, if you look at history, that isn't true. If you look at examples like the Bolshevik Revolution and the 1968 revolution in France, then you see that this isn't true. Another thing I have to say is that I don't really have very much to say about the last section of this segment. Though I have to say that he seems very narcissistic. He's very egotistical and likes to overvalue his own greatness.
Capitalism isn't sustainable.
Well, socialism certainly isn't. The math doesn't even work on paper.
The problem is very simple. The economy keeps expanding. New ways to profit is constantly invented.
Even though the same amount of resources are available. Ponder that.
But our planet cannot keep up with this growth.
We're not talking about using more and more of the planet's resources. We're talking about using them more efficiently.
Our planet has a finite amount of resources, and capitalism will every year demand more resources from our planet.
Capitalism is how you deal with scarce resources. It's about doing more with the same amount. Funny how that's something else you morons don't seem to want to mention.
If every human on this planet was going to live like an average American, we would have needed 3.8 Earths.
Long debunked Malthusian crap. Ever since Malthus, you people have done this, over and over again, and gotten different figures. First, the planet couldn't sustain 500 million people. Then it couldn't sustain 1 billion. Then it couldn't sustain 4 billion. Every single time you people make a calculation like this, based on how many resources are available on the planet, we end up sailing right past it. Why? Because none of you have accounted for increased efficiencies in the market. The market in the US works as well as it does because it's efficient. Markets in places like sub-Saharan Africa aren't quite so efficient. We need capitalism to make those countries more efficient, and yet, that's the very thing you're arguing against!
Now in this segment, Killigan then goes on to say that socialism is bad, and he doesn't really go into that much detail on it, really. And when you look at places like the Soviet Union, for all their flaws, they made mass production. They industrialized their country, and so did many places under the command economy. In fact, many countries that were anti-Soviet also had a command economy. And Killigan doesn't really go into detail about that. For a large portion of this segment of the video, I actually agree with him. I agree with him about people complain about the growth in population. That people make a prediction of when human population is going to ruin all of the earth. Yet, it didn't happen. And I also agree that capitalism does form some type of production for the population. It does bring the resources to a certain goal. At certain times, capitalism can be good in how it distributes its resources in certain cases and situations. But I'm of course talking about this in the context of dialectical materialism, and the idea that the Industrial Revolution was a good thing. For it has so many negative things, yet it has enough positive things that make it an angel of goodness compared to everything that came before it. That is things like feudalism.
Profit motive makes people do irrational choices.
Citation needed. If a business makes irrational choices, it goes out of business.
This is why a lot of unethical things has gotten so big.
How come these unethical things keep happening to a greater extent with businesses that have more government support, huh? That's something else you people never have an answer for.
There we go again, another assumption. You are right that many of these negative things have happened due to government-funded corporations. But the thing you don't realize is that realistic capitalism put into practice, is supposed to be like this. This libertarian capitalism you think of has almost never been put into practice. And your arguments can be compared to a left communist or Trotskyite that sees the Soviet Union as not real communism due to you having this perception of what is the real ideology.
This is why child labor is so common where it's legal.
Are you kidding? It's capitalism that eliminated child labor. The laws only came about afterwards, as government does what it always does: jump in front of a parade and pretend to be leading it. Whenever some developing country like Bangladesh tries eliminating child labor, the children don't spend all day merrily skipping through fields or anything. They go into prostitution or they starve. Do you honestly think there was no child labor, and then all of a sudden capitalism came on and some bald guy with a monocle and handlebar mustache grabbed them and threw them into the mines? And do you think that parents in developing countries are horrible parents who don't care about their kids and force them to work? The kids have to work or the family starves. Again, capitalism is the game changer here. By making labor more efficient, they make it so the entire family doesn't have to work.
Hi, my name's Yahu Williams. I'm a historian, and here's what you need to know in order to sound smart about child labor. Children have been an important part of the labor force throughout human history. But in the 19th century, this became a problem due to industrialization, as children were exposed to dangerous working conditions. Employers, however, saw a huge benefit to the use of child labor. Children were smaller and more nimble, and so therefore could perform functions that would be more difficult for adults. In addition, it was more difficult for children to unionize, and employers could pay them lower wages than they had to pay adults. This, however, was a deep source of concern for reformers, who believed that children were not only placed in jeopardy by virtue of this work, but that they also should be receiving an education instead. Reformers pointed to the horrible working conditions, the long hours, and the low wages that children received. In the 1840s, just as American reformers were having some success in limiting child working hours for native-born Americans, an influx of immigrants from places like Ireland provided a fresh supply of child labor for the burgeoning Industrial Revolution. Between 1902 and 1905, several organizations committed themselves to seeing an end to child labor in the United States. But it wasn't until the advent of the Great Depression that real change was on the horizon. With so many Americans out of work, labor unions and laborers began to clamor for an end to child labor to ensure that the adult working population would have enough jobs. This proved to be an important development. Lawmakers actually drafted legislation which ended the practice in the United States, limiting working hours and improving working conditions for young people. One of the lasting legacies of the battle to end the use of child labor is the importance of education. American reformers were able to make the case successfully that young people in a democracy needed to be educated in order to perform their civic duty.
In the early 1900s, the general population in those years had very little understanding of what was meant by child labor and child exploitation. The kinds of jobs you would find children working in ranged from the mines, the factories, the cotton mills, to working out on the streets selling newspapers. Injuries, even deaths, were very common among children. The parents would often say that they needed the income that their children brought in, that was what allowed them to continue to survive. A number of parents were advocates for child labor, and their children thought that that was the way life was. One of the first things the National Child Labor Committee did was to hire a photographer. They hired Louis Hine, who was then their photographer for the next 2 decades. They sent him around the country to identify, find, and photograph children in exploitative situations. He promoted himself as a Bible salesman. He said he was bringing his camera along so he could photograph kids reading Bibles. A boy would say he was 13 when in fact he was 11, or a girl would say she was 12 when in fact she might be 9. The photograph is of a young girl, 10 or 11 years old. Her name was Sadie Pfeiffer, at a cotton mill in Lancaster, South Carolina. She's standing in front of a large loom on a long hallway, staring at and working hard on the job of selecting the quality products. She's probably worked most of the night. It's nearing the end of her shift. She stands there, iconic, as a representative of hundreds of other girls who are being treated just like her and who have no choice. That photograph raised the consciousness immediately. You see that photograph and you cannot look away from it. It doesn't say America. Louis Hine's stark photographs influenced legislation over a period of roughly 35 years. This body of work on child labor represented how he thought and how he felt that children must not be exploited. He represents the most important photographer in terms of social advocacy and social change in the first half of the 20th century.
Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when the mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out. Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when the mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out.
That's why we keep cutting down the rainforest.
Funny how you don't see deforestation in privately owned forests, only ones managed by government. It's called the tragedy of the commons, and it's what you get with collective ownership like what you want. The solution to the tragedy of the commons is private ownership.
This is bad for the workers, it's bad for the climate.
Funny again how countries with greater economic freedom have better environmental scores.
And it's bad for everyone else. In order to save the climate, eco-activists has to abolish capitalism.
Oh, there's an island. We can land on that. And there's only one tree. It's a palm tree right on the edge of the island. You'd have to be the mother of all idiots to get entangled up in that.
Oh God, boys, I'm coming in hot. Oh no, oh no. Oh God damn it, who put this tree here?
Ah, damn it, Daps, what did I just say? What was that about? Why did the pilot jump out of the plane to his death?
I guess he thought it was the easy way out. What a coward.
Out of what? We paid him well, didn't we? Didn't we?
Well, I decided to keep a lot of the money for myself.
What?
Yeah, you know what it is. Black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow. Yeah, you know what it is. Black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow.